The snow had been falling since late afternoon, thick and silent, swallowing the road behind me mile by mile. By the time the sun disappeared completely, the world outside my windshield was nothing but a tunnel of white and darkness. The weather forecast had mentioned a snowstorm, but I hadn't expected it to be this bad. The wipers struggled to keep up, scraping ice away every few seconds. My phone had no signal, and the GPS had frozen hours ago. The last sign of civilization had been a small gas station nearly 50 miles back. I kept driving because stopping in the middle of nowhere felt worse than moving forward. The forest on both sides of the road had turned into tall black silhouettes, their branches heavy with snow. Every now and then the headlights caught something strange, shapes that almost looked like someone standing among the trees, but when I blinked they were just trunks covered in ice. Then the engine coughed. At first it was a small sputter, barely noticeable. Then it happened again, louder. The dashboard lights flickered, and my stomach dropped. I pressed the gas pedal, hoping it was nothing. The engine died. The car rolled silently until it drifted into a thick pile of snow on the side of the road. I tried starting it again. The engine turned once, twice, then nothing. The silence outside felt enormous. Snow hit the windshield like grains of sand. I stepped out, and the cold punched the air from my lungs. My boots sank into snow almost up to my knees. The road behind me was already disappearing under fresh snow. Then I saw the faint glow. Through the trees on the left side of the road, far back in the forest, there was a light. A cabin. It was the only sign of life anywhere. I grabbed my backpack, zipped my coat tighter, and started walking toward it. The snowstorm howled through the trees, branches creaking above me. Every step was heavy, exhausting. By the time I reached the clearing, my legs were shaking. The cabin looked old, the kind built decades ago and forgotten. The windows were dark except for one small yellow glow flickering inside. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney. I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again, harder. The door creaked open slowly by itself. Inside, the cabin smelled like burning wood and something older like damp wood and dust. A fireplace crackled quietly in the corner. A lantern sat on the table. But no one was there. "Hello?" I called. My voice sounded small inside the room. Nothing moved. Snow blew through the open doorway behind me, and the wind howled louder. I stepped inside and closed the door. Whoever owned the place must have stepped out. The warmth from the fireplace felt incredible after the freezing walk. I sat down on the old couch and waited. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Still no one came. I started to wonder if the owner had left the fire burning earlier and never returned. That's when I heard footsteps outside. Crunch, crunch. Someone was walking through the snow toward the cabin. Relief rushed through me. I stood up. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. I waited for a knock, but there wasn't one. Instead, slow footsteps began circling the cabin. Crunch, crunch, crunch. They moved past the window. I turned my head, expecting to see someone looking inside. But the window showed nothing but swirling snow. The footsteps continued around the cabin again. And again, like someone pacing. I opened the door slightly and called out, "Hello?" The snowstorm roared, but the footsteps stopped instantly. Complete silence. Then from somewhere behind the cabin, a voice whispered, "You shouldn't be in there." My heart jumped into my throat. "Who's there?" I shouted. No answer. I stepped outside and walked around the side of the cabin. The snow was deep and untouched except for one set of footprints circling the house. They led to the back door, which was wide open. Inside the cabin behind me, I slowly turned around. The front door I had closed was now standing open again, and the lantern inside had gone out. The road up the mountain had been closed for hours when I reached the ranger station. The storm had come earlier than expected, and the snow had already buried most of the trail. But the small winter cabin nearby was unlocked for emergencies, the ranger had told me. "You can stay there tonight," he said. "Just don't wander too far in the storm." I thanked him and hiked the short trail to the cabin. The snowstorm was brutal. Wind screamed through the trees like something alive. By the time I reached the cabin, my beard was frozen solid, and my gloves were stiff with ice. The cabin was small but solid. thick wooden walls, a wood stove, and 2 bunk beds. Someone had stocked firewood nearby. I lit the stove and watched the flames slowly warm the room. Outside, the snowstorm grew worse. The wind slammed against the walls, rattling the windows violently. But inside felt safe. For the first hour. Then I heard something hit the roof. A loud thud. I looked up. Another thud. It sounded like something heavy landing on the roof, then sliding slightly. Probably snow shifting, I told myself. Then came scratching. Long, slow, dragging scratches across the ceiling. My skin crawled. Animals sometimes climbed onto cabins for warmth, I reminded myself. Maybe a raccoon. But raccoons didn't sound this heavy. The scratching moved across the roof slowly, then stopped right above the bed. Silence filled the cabin again. Then something slammed against the door. Hard. I jumped up. Another slam followed, rattling the frame. "Hello?" I shouted. No response. The storm outside roared louder. The door handle moved. Slowly. Back and forth. Someone was trying to open it. But the door was locked. The handle twisted harder, rattling violently. Then suddenly it stopped. I stood there holding the fireplace poker, barely breathing. A few seconds later, footsteps appeared outside, crunching in the snow. They moved around the cabin slowly. I grabbed a flashlight and looked out the window. Nothing. Just snow. The footsteps continued, circling the cabin again and again. Then they stopped beneath the window, and something slowly rose up outside. A face pressed against the glass. But it wasn't a person. The skin looked pale and frozen, stretched tight across sharp bones. The eyes were wide open and glassy. And the mouth moved slowly, like it was whispering, even though I couldn't hear anything through the storm. Then the head tilted sideways, and the thing began smiling. The storm arrived faster than anyone expected. By midnight, the entire valley had disappeared beneath swirling snow and violent wind. The small hunting cabin deep in the forest was supposed to be safe shelter until morning. 3 of us had taken refuge there. Me, Daniel, and Marcus. We had been driving back from a winter camping trip when the storm closed the road. The old cabin belonged to Marcus's uncle, and he insisted we stay there for the night. At first, everything seemed normal. We lit the fireplace, drank hot coffee, and laughed about how insane the storm was. Then the power went out. The lights died instantly, leaving only the orange glow of the fireplace. The wind outside sounded like a freight train roaring through the trees. Daniel walked over to the window. "You guys see that?" he said quietly. Marcus and I joined him. Through the snow, barely visible beyond the tree line, stood another cabin. Marcus frowned. "That's weird. You didn't know about it?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "My uncle said this was the only one up here." The other cabin looked abandoned. Its windows were dark and half buried in snow. But as we watched, a light turned on inside it. We looked at each other. "Maybe another group got stuck," Daniel said. Marcus grabbed a flashlight. "I'll go check." "I'll come with you," Daniel said. The 2 of them stepped into the storm. I stayed inside by the fire. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The wind screamed louder outside. They should have been back by now. I stepped outside to look. The storm instantly swallowed me. Snow blew so hard I could barely see 10 feet ahead. But I could still see the second cabin faintly through the trees. Its light was still on, and the door was open. But Daniel and Marcus were nowhere in sight. I ran toward the cabin, fighting through the snow. When I reached the door, I stepped inside carefully. The cabin was empty. No furniture. No fireplace. No footprints. No signs anyone had been there in years. The light I saw earlier wasn't a lamp. It was a lantern sitting in the center of the floor, still burning, and beside it, 2 fresh sets of footprints, but only leading inside, not back out. Then behind me, through the roaring storm outside, I heard the front door of the first cabin slam shut. The wind had been screaming through the mountains since before sunset, but by midnight the storm had turned into something violent enough to make the entire forest feel alive. Snow slammed against the windows of the cabin in thick waves, piling higher every minute. The trees outside bent and groaned under the weight of ice. It felt like the whole world had been swallowed by winter. I had rented the cabin for a quiet weekend alone. It sat deep in the mountains, nearly 15 miles from the nearest town, and the owner had warned me that storms could trap people there for days. At the time it sounded peaceful. Now it sounded like a mistake. The cabin itself was small but sturdy. Thick wooden walls, a fireplace that cracked and popped with burning logs, and a narrow hallway that led to a single bedroom. The electricity flickered every few minutes as the wind hammered the power lines somewhere outside. Around 1 a.m., the lights finally went out. The cabin fell into darkness except for the glow of the fire. I grabbed a flashlight from my bag and set it on the table. The storm outside sounded like it was tearing the mountain apart. Snow scratched against the windows like claws. I tried to relax, telling myself this was normal during heavy storms. Then something knocked on the door. 3 slow knocks. I froze. No one could be out there in weather like this. The knocks came again. Slower this time. Knock. 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 My heart started racing. Maybe someone else had gotten stranded in the storm. I walked toward the door cautiously and called out, "Hello?" No answer. The wind howled outside, rattling the door and its frame. Then the knocking came again. Louder. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. Freezing wind exploded into the cabin, blowing snow across the floor. I stepped outside and shined the flashlight into the storm. Nothing. Just swirling snow and darkness. "Hello?" I shouted again. The forest didn't respond. Confused, I stepped back inside and closed the door quickly. Snow melted into small puddles on the wooden floor. I locked the door again and walked back to the fire. That's when I noticed something strange. There were footprints in the snow on the porch. Bare footprints. They were small like a child's, and they led directly to the door. But there were no footprints leading away. A cold feeling spread through my chest. I stared at the door for a long time, listening to the storm rage outside. Minutes passed. Then I heard footsteps behind me, inside the cabin. Slow footsteps coming from a hallway. The road had disappeared hours ago, buried under thick layers of snow. My truck had slid into a ditch nearly 2 miles back, and after struggling with it for an hour, I realized I had no choice but to walk. The snowstorm was brutal. Wind pushed against me so hard it felt like walking through water. I had been following a narrow trail through the forest when I saw the cabin. Its windows glowed faintly with warm yellow light. Relief flooded through me. I stumbled onto the porch and knocked hard. The door opened almost instantly. An old man stood inside. He looked thin and pale, wrapped in a heavy wool coat. His beard was long and gray, and his eyes looked tired. "Storm caught you too?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Come in before you freeze." Inside, the cabin was warm and dimly lit by oil lamps. A pot of soup simmered on the stove, filling the air with a comforting smell. "Thank you," I said, rubbing warmth back into my hands. The old man nodded silently and returned to his chair near the fire. For a while neither of us spoke. The storm outside roared against the cabin walls. Finally I asked, "Do you live out here alone?" "Yes." "Must get lonely." The old man stared into the fire. "You get used to it." Something about his voice felt strange. Flat. Almost distant. I ate a bowl of soup gratefully. It tasted good, though slightly bitter. After a while I started feeling extremely tired. My eyelids felt heavy. The old man noticed. "Storm makes people sleepy," he said quietly. I tried to respond, but my words felt slow. The room spun slightly. Then something caught my attention. On the far wall of the cabin were photographs. Dozens of them. Old black and white pictures of people standing in the snow outside the cabin. All strangers. Men, women, hikers, travelers. Every one of them smiling beside the same cabin. But something about the photos made my stomach twist. Each picture had only one set of footprints leading to the door. None leading away. And in every photograph, standing faintly in the window behind them, was the same old man, watching. The snowstorm that night was the worst anyone had seen in years. Roads were closed, Power lines collapsed, and the entire mountain range disappeared beneath blinding snow. My sister and I had been driving back from a ski trip when we got stranded. Luckily, we found an abandoned ranger cabin beside the road. At least we thought it was abandoned. The door was unlocked. Inside, the cabin smelled dusty but dry. A small fireplace sat in the corner, and someone had left a stack of firewood beside it. "This will work," my sister said. We lit the fire and tried calling for help, but there was no signal. Outside, the storm became violent. Snow covered the windows completely within an hour. The world disappeared. At first we passed time